Welcome to the Academic Woman Amplified podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak, tenured full professor, mom of three, and firm believer that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. In the summer season of the podcast, we're busting the myth of the quote-unquote traditional path through academia by featuring the life stories of diverse academic women who have created success for themselves on their terms. Get ready to get inspired. Let's go. This week, we're talking to someone who has been thrust into the spotlight by COVID-19. Today's guest is Becky Dawson. She is an epidemiologist who works in public health, and she tells her story of how she very strategically navigated her career. Becky is a full professor and had relatively recently become full professor when COVID-19 started. And as a result of being vocal and knowledgeable about epidemics, she was invited to make an appearance on her local TV show as an expert, as like, ask Dr. Becky about the epidemic, right? So this really started to change things for her in her career and kind of thrust her into the public spotlight in a way that not many of us can relate to. So in this episode, we talk about Becky's strategic moves, how she left an R1, that position that we think is kind of the gold standard for researchers, a position at an R1 university, how she decided to switch universities and go back to a place that was kind of more like her hometown, her home institution, and how she has really made a very impactful career for herself there, making very strategic moves in relation to the global pandemic, and has been able to amplify her message about public health by taking advantage of getting featured in media outlets and really becoming an expert in a very, very hands-on kind of tangible, how can I make a difference in public health during a pandemic kind of way. So we talk about her journey through academia. We talk about the last few months. She tells you her message for whoever, like if you gave an epidemiologist 5 minutes to tell the world something about the pandemic, what would she say? So look forward to that at the end of our conversation. And I just want to note real quick that we recorded this episode before George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter protests. So it might feel a little bit like something's missing, and that's why, because we recorded this before all of that happened. But I do think it is such a valuable interview to hear that we wanted to put it out, even though it doesn't directly address another big connection in public health, which is racism and public health. So we hope that you enjoy this episode. So I'm here with Dr. Becky Dawson, and would you please introduce yourself, tell us your pronouns, your field of study, and what you do now?
So my name is Becky Dawson. I go by she, her, and hers. I am an epidemiologist by training, and I have a joint appointment in a biology department and an interdisciplinary global health studies program at Allegheny College.
As you will hear, listeners, this is Dr. Becky's moment. This is
my Super Bowl.
Yes, we'll get into it later. But let's start with like the beginning of kind of your academic journey. So like, what were you like as a kid?
So as a kid, and Still today, I am a rule follower. I am a very structured individual. I grew up as a competitive swimmer.
Wow.
So I swam from when I was 9 through my senior year of college, which swimming is a very intensive sport.
Yes.
So I was really disciplined as a kid. So that made my schooling disciplined. It made my swimming disciplined. It made kind of even like my extracurricular work type of thing very disciplined. So
Yeah.
I think that if I had to describe my upbringing and like my childhood, it was disciplined.
Okay. So when did you know that you would go to college?
In my family, I don't think that there was any question about whether or not college was important. But as a swimmer, I became very clearly aware that my athletics would open doors to colleges that I probably wouldn't have if I were just a student applying to college.
Okay. So that affected your decision when you were thinking about like, where am I going to go and what am I going to do?
Oh, absolutely.
So tell us about that. Like, how did you decide what college to go to and what to major in?
So I didn't start looking at colleges until I was a senior in high school. I put it off as long as I could. And I think part of that reason was I was very undecided as a senior in high school. I knew classes that I liked and like things that like I was attracted to, but I didn't know how that like how do you make a career out of that? What's the job associated with that?
Right.
And I knew what I was good at.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I didn't know how to turn that into a job. Mm-hmm. So really, I picked the swimming program where I felt, and literally, if you just heard that, I picked the swimming program.
Yes.
That was kind of at the top of the game, like nationally competitive, but not like at the top where I couldn't contribute. So I found like a happy medium where I could be a key player and knew that I could succeed. But honestly, I picked a school that allowed me to tell people where I was going and they knew I would get a good education.
Oh, that's that's very thoughtful for like a 17 or 18-year-old, right? Like
yes,
knowing exactly that sweet spot kind of.
Yes, I'm good at sweet spots. Like okay. I think that's like one of my superpowers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So what was it like to go to college as a college athlete?
So I was really confident as a college athlete. And so that made like stepping into campus really, really well. My one kind of embarrassing story, I actually came to college with a terrible fungal infection in my eyes and like had to glasses. It was like I had to go home for all sorts of like doctor's appointments and everything. So like and my eyes were constantly red and then combined with like chlorine. It was a rough first semester. Like really, it was my middle school moment, but as an 18-year-old.
Oh, no.
So I was really confident in the pool. And it really took me about 9 months of college to really like transfer that into my academics. And so that was definitely an evolution for me. I was not a straight A student in college. I struggled hard.
And did that feel different than high school for you? Like, were
oh
you?
my gosh, yes. And I think I missed a lot of, especially my first like year and a half of college. I missed a lot of like the big picture thinking. Like, why are we doing this? Like, I just was so used to muscling through things and just being disciplined to get through the to-do list that I missed a lot of the big picture why.
Yeah. So how did you decide on your major? I mean, it must have been like a lot of swimming, hours and hours of swimming. So how did you decide what you wanted to major in?
Okay, this is the lamest story ever. So, and it just goes to show that it doesn't matter.
Right.
So I was interested in the education program at the college that I went to, and it forced you to take classes all across the college. And I think I was probably more attracted to you could take anything during your first years because it would meet some sort of requirement. So I landed in a really great history class and a really great environmental science class. Both of them phenomenal. And I was like, okay, like I could see myself going down both of these roads and being really happy, but they're really different. I didn't want to double major, like none of that. So I actually had to miss the week before spring break because of swimming. I was going to miss an entire week of school, which is midterms. I had a history paper, I could handle that, but I had to walk into the chair of the environmental science program's office and say, I'm not going to be here for the final or for the midterm. So how do we handle this? So 19-year-old me cried for days before having to walk into this man's office and be like, I'm a swimmer. I've qualified for nationals. We're leaving Monday. I won't be here. But finally walked into his office, and it was one of the turning points for me as an athlete and as a person, as a student, because he said, okay, let's figure it out. Like, okay, you can't be here. What are we going to do? And that conversation ended with, you did really well on the first test. I see your potential here. if you decide to major in environmental science, I'll be your advisor. And it sealed the deal for me. In that moment, it sealed the deal for me, right? The affirmation that I had done well, the promise that I could be successful, and then just breaking that boundary of having to go ask for an advisor, which is so intimidating for some of us at 19. Just, it opened the door and I never looked back.
Wow. That's amazing. Okay. So what happened like as you were getting ready to graduate? Like, how did you decide what the next steps were?
So I went to an undergraduate institution that you had to do a senior like thesis, like a comprehensive project. You had to plan for that your junior year. And I was kind of struggling with like what I wanted to do and everything, and had a really, really amazing mentor who said, I had taken a class with her before, and she said, go back to your reading journal. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I had this handwritten reading journal, and I went back, and her advice was find the 2 readings from that whole semester that stick out to you. And then she said, find the commonality between them. I said, okay. So I did. I went back and I read, and I found the 2 pieces of writing, and I'm happy to share what they are.
Yes.
The 2 pieces of writing. And it was in a moment, the clarity like became very clear. So the 2 pieces of writing were Rachel Carson's Sense of Wonder, which is her essay about being on the beach and kind of exploring that space. And then Sandra Steingraber's Living Downstream, which is what her tagline is, an ecologist like look at the environment and cancer. She's a poet and a cancer survivor, and she wove in science and narrative and into this beautiful piece. And I realized that I was interested in an intersection. I wasn't in a discipline. I was at an intersection of human health and environment. And so I'm a big pool analogy. I jumped in the deep end without, no hesitation. And so that was sort of like where I went my senior year. And then I knew coming out of my senior year of college that like, I wasn't prepared to enter the world of public health. And I was really aiming towards the health side of things more than the environmental side of things. And so I got some really wise advice that like a master's of public health degree would be really important to kind of like set my trajectory. So that's how I ended up going from undergrad to Emory to get my MPH.
Wow. That is like some dang good advice from that person who told you to go back to your reading journal and find the intersection. Like that is a really beautiful thing. Like,
yeah. So shout out to Giovanna DeCuro. Yeah. Seriously. I mean, really.
Fabulous. Okay. So did you go right from undergrad to grad, or did you do something in between?
So I went right from undergrad to a master's program. At the end of my master's program, knew that like I needed some real space. I needed to figure out how I wanted to use all of this knowledge. So after my MPH, I moved to Washington, D.C. and worked again in an intersection position, right? In the intersection of public policy and public health, trying to do a lot of translational work, a lot of research. So I spent 6 years doing that until I knew how I wanted to go back for my PhD. And I had a really, really clear set of criteria and expectations for myself that made the decision-making process for my PhD very easy.
Nice. I love that. Like it really, like it centers you in a way and clears out all the like crap, right? Like,
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So what did you decide to do the PhD in? How did you choose your school?
So my journey to doing a PhD came with, I'm going to just say it. I fell in love with a man's job. So not the man, right?
Oh my goodness.
I found an individual whose job I wanted. Like I watched what he did and what he was involved with and the spread of his work. And I'm like, that is me. Like that's where I want to be. So stalking is probably too harsh of a word, but I tracked him down and I tried at meetings, at conferences, webinars. I tried to get in a room with him, we were part of a same grant program running out of the Centers for Disease Control. And so like there was opportunity for that. And I finally just said, hey, I really like how you do it. And I said, can we meet for coffee? And so we did. We met at a corner bakery in DC and we sat down and he's like, here's my advice. And he laid it out for me very clearly. He's like, you want to go to a PhD program in epidemiology. You want to get a master's degree in statistics, so that they should come together. Don't let anyone say otherwise. And his advice was go to a medical school that offered a PhD.
Wow. That's very specific advice.
It was. And he was very clear on why each of those things were important. Mm-hmm. And I applied to a couple of programs that weren't exactly what he suggested. Some of them, the doors just closed because I wasn't a good fit for them. But some of them I went and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not the right fit for me. Uh-huh. It was very clear. He was right. And shout out to Mark.
Yeah, so I want to know, like, what was he doing that made you fall in love with what he was doing? Like, what was the specific thing that you saw that you were like, that's it?
So the work that he was doing was directly impacting the community that he was serving. So his employer was the State Department of Health, and he was working on, and I didn't really care about the topics, right? I cared about what he was doing, right?
Yep.
He was working on a children's asthma campaign. He was working on this big project. We were working on it together, but he was running the Wisconsin one where they were bringing together health data and environmental data to look at intersections, like how health impacts our environment and vice versa. And then what I really liked about his job was he also was part of large movements at like the national level through associations. He was teaching at the School of Public Health. Like his sphere of influence was large, but it was so focused. Like it was always this epidemiological focus, but his ability to interact with students, with the community at a national level, like policy setting with organizations and associations, that was really meaningful to me. And so I think that's what drew me to it.
Wow. That's so, okay, cool. And I love how you were like so proactive. You're very like, by the end of this interview, everyone will be like, she's so strategic because you're very strategic.
Oh, yes, I am.
Yes, I admit it. Okay. So you go to grad school, you find the place that fits. What was it like to study your PhD? And did you have good mentors? And how'd you choose your dissertation topic?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I started my PhD the fall that I turned 30. Mm-hmm. Everyone called me the grandma. So I was the grandma of my program. Like you would just hear like grandma. Like I knew to turn around.
Oh my gosh.
Was the oldest one there. But yes, so it was a really good program. But I got pregnant the spring of my first year.
On purpose, can I ask?
No.
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely not. No.
That happens exactly to me, but not in the PhD, in the tenure track. It was like, whoops.
Oh.
Here we go.
Right. And so that was really hard. So like emotionally, I was a wreck. I was a wreck emotionally because of the hormones, but then also kind of the reality of like, how am I going to finish this program? I have funding. I have, plans. We just bought a house. What am I doing? So it was hard. And I would say that the program that I was in, it was a mixed bag of support and not support, but for me, and I think this is one of the key, as I've been kind of like preparing for this, one of the key reflective moments is that one person can make all of the difference. Like one person can change the course of everything. So I was kind of getting a mixed bag of things and people were, oh, do I want to really work with her in her dissertation? She's going to have a baby, on and on and on. Mm-hmm. But we had, the way that our program was structured was after your after the fall of your second year was when you took your comprehensive exams. Ours were a 3-day event. It was long, very, very long. And you had to finish like this set of coursework. And because of when my firstborn was due, I was going to miss like a 6-week class. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of had my mind around knowing that I hadn't, gotten the most support about the whole thing. I just kind of thought like, I'll have to take it a year later. I won't take it with my cohort. I will survive. Like I kind of got into that mode. Went to meet with the department chair, who was a lovely, lovely woman. And this is probably the most meaningful thing that happened. She said, no, you can take it in January. And I'm like, excuse me? Like, she's like, now you have to recognize you're going to be 6 weeks. You're going to have coursework that you're missing. And I'm like, okay, I have friends. Like, I don't need to be in the classroom. I can talk to my peers and everything. And I kind of looked at her funny and she knew that I like wanted to ask something like, why are you doing this to me? This is so kind. And she looked at me and she said, when I was finishing my PhD, and so she probably finished her PhD in the early 80s as a female in biostatistics.
Wow.
She is a pioneer, but she and her family had to move because of her husband's job before she finished her dissertation. And the chair of her department told her, I'm going to let you finish abroad, even though this is unprecedented. You're unprecedented in the program. And he's like, here's the promise. You pay this forward someday when somebody under your control needs kindness and needs a break and everything. And so she looked at me and she's like, I'm paying this forward. This is your responsibility now.
Wow.
And I was like, so she honestly, like, to be honest, like, I don't even remember the response of other people in my department, but that moment, and to know that I was part of this history of paying it forward and passing along kindness and grace in the middle of a dissertation, PhD, all of that. It's a gift to me. Like, not only was it a gift, like, to be told I could take my comps despite the coursework, it was just such a gift to be part of this long chain and knowing that, like, it's some moment, right? Like, and I've never had the chance to, like, give it that big, because it's a big give, right? Like, that's not like, oh, you can take your exam like a day late. This is a big gift. So I'm looking forward to the day that I actually have the opportunity to pay that forward and then pass this legacy on to someone else.
Okay, so these are like the stories. This is why I wanted to do the podcast like this, because this summer, because it's like, you don't hear that, unfortunately, right? You hear the stories of the people who had these horrible experiences, and you don't even know that a story like this is possible. So just hearing you say that and knowing that you are going to go into the world and do that for somebody, probably more than once. And, and that is just like a really beautiful.
It is. Yeah.
So you had baby before dissertation then?
Oh, I actually had two.
Oh.
So this is my proudest moment of my PhD, is that I defended my dissertation the day that my second child, who's a son, was due.
Oh.
So I went in 9 months pregnant.
Oh my God.
I ripped 3 pairs of pantyhose trying to get dressed that morning and just said, screw it, and put on pants.
No.
No, it's fantastic. And then, so I did. I was exactly 9 months pregnant. He was 2 weeks late. So we were fine. But again, I was at a medical school. So I was emotionally prepared for the stress of this event could put me into labor, and I will deliver here and I will be fine.
Wow.
So anyways, Yes, I did. I was fine. We went home. All was well.
Wow. So that's amazing. So tell me about, like, so did you just like immediately go on the market? Did you wait? Like, were you going on the market breastfeeding or with newborn or whatever feeding method it was used? It doesn't matter.
Yeah. So I had a crazy timeline. So my plan was to defend my dissertation in June. So I was on the market like during the throes of pregnancy, like through all of it. My dissertation defense actually ended up being pushed back until the fall. We had multiple deaths in our department. I mean, like everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And there was no point in even arguing. Like, just tragedy occurred and that was fine. So I went on the market like kind of like winter, spring, as I like was pregnant. And I just kind of made up my mind that I was going to wait to see what happened. And then, if I got job offers, that would be when I disclosed that I was pregnant and everything. So I did go on the market. I had a couple of offers, but landed at a large research institution, which felt right to me at the time. It was a 50-50 split between teaching and research, really great local health department collaboration. So I kind of started seeing like Mark's job, like kind of creating for myself. My email address would be .edu and his was .gov. Like that didn't matter to me. I really did see it kind of coming together. So I missed my first semester. I was out on maternity leave and whatever. Jumped back in January with, I said, a 2.5-month-old at that point in time. Crazy. Yeah. Like I would pump on the drive home from work. Like it was just insane. So, but this is where, so I'm sitting there and I had gotten like, they were super kind about my pregnancy. I just said like, we're going to need you to make up a class, whether it be in summertime or next fall. Like it was kind of the deal that like, you owe us one, like no problem, one class. That February though, like as I'm stepping into the classroom, first year, tenure track, big research institution, on and on and on, my alma mater announced that they were starting a global health studies program. Ooh. And I was like, oh my gosh. And like it was the first like position for that. So they were like, we're going to hire someone. It could be an epidemiologist, a medical anthropologist, like we're flexible. And I saw it and I cried. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is actually where I want to be. But I knew that I owed my current job a class and I felt really uneasy about it. So I think as I was thinking, like one of the pieces of advice, I called my friend that's my yes, no friend, right? Like who like tells me like, yes, you should do this or no, you shouldn't. So I explained to her, her name's Becky also. And I said, Becky, what do I do? And she said, you can't apply. It's unethical. You owe your institution a class. Don't do it. And I said, okay. So I hung up the phone, I deleted the email, and I walked on and I got back to the place by the end of the summer where I, finished my first year on the tenure track and had my class made up. Like I had taken that step. It was October then that my alma mater said, hey, we're looking for an epidemiologist now. And the job description read like my resume. Somebody who loves research and students and wants to be in the community doing things. And it just felt like it was redeeming that I had ethically made the right decision, that I owed the university something, but also like the perfect position came up, right? Joint appointment with biology, which felt much more natural to me, everything. So I was 2 years on the tenure track at a research institution and then switched to a small liberal arts college.
Wow.
After 2 years on that tenure track.
I want to highlight a couple things. First of all, everyone needs to go get yourself a yes, no friend, like a very ethical person of
for sure.
Yes. How long have you known the other Becky? Like, how did you decide that she was your yes, no friend so we can all go out and get one?
So she's my yes, no friend. I actually have 2 yes, no friends now. So she's my yes, no friend. I mean, she's just one of those people that I met as a young professional living in DC by myself. We shared 100 meals together and went on vacations together while we were single. And she's just one of those people who I trust. But what I found as I got into my current institution is that I needed a yes. I call her my nobody, actually. So Barbara's my nobody, where I don't make decisions most of the time without talking them through with her. Because I think that I spent my first year at my current job saying yes to everyone, trying so hard to be a team player, a people person, to figuring out my research, like within the context of the college, that I said yes to everyone. And by the time I started my second year, I had pneumonia and I was like down. I just couldn't do it. So I think it's helpful to have like your good friend, but I think in your institution, nobody who understands the system. For me, my nobody's not age-wise a couple years older, but she's about 2 years further ahead of me. And that was to my benefit to have her there. I feel like now we're kind of nobodies together, like not no
I know
BUDY together. But, it was so beneficial to have her just to say, somebody's put this in front of me. Do I say yes or do I step away?
Right. No, that's fantastic. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight was, I really think, as I've been saying, right, that there's this idea of a path, at a very accepted path, and get a tenure track at an R1 and then leave it for a small liberal arts college is not that. Really, there's this idea that not everybody, obviously, but there's kind of a general idea out there in academia that says the R1 is the prize. Absolutely. If you got that. So tell me a little bit, what was it like? Did people give you side eye when you were did people say why are you leaving this? This is the prize.
Yeah, I think the people who knew me well, that was fine. They were not a problem. But people at the institution where I was, I mean, they were gracious. They weren't mean about it. But just why would you leave? And the institution had just gotten a new president and there was all this growth and momentum and goal setting of we're going to be not just an R1, we're going to be one of the better R1s. At the time, the School of Public Health was getting a new building. I mean, all the sexy stuff, right? New building, new offices, new all of this. Why would you go to, I live in Meadville, Pennsylvania, and I used to be a Washington, D.C. resident. Right. But as I've told people, I'm not in this to be getting multi-million-dollar grants. I'm in it because I want communities to be healthy, and I want to train the next generation of students that also want to make communities healthy. And I feel like the biggest impact I would have is here in a small liberal arts environment. And I'm so comfortable with that. Like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to we're getting ready to talk about the current moment, but let's first talk about what it was like. So you were at the R1, you went back to your alma mater, right? That it was an
Yeah.
institution that you knew, what was that kind of, and moving kind of 2 years into the tenure track, did you have to restart clock? Talk about some of those things.
Yeah, so I did restart my clock. I had offers to push it forward, but as we heard, a situational awareness is really important to me. And the culture of our college really is that you need to put in your time here and be evaluated here. And I didn't want to, the rush, right?
Right.
I didn't think it was worth it. I wanted to, if I got tenure here, I wanted it to be because I had gone through the system and that I had done the work and I had kind of proven myself. That was really important to me. I never wanted anyone to look at me and say oh, she cut corners, because that's not the person that I am. Right. I'm a rule follower. So I didn't restart my clock, and I had people telling me, why aren't you doing this and everything? But again, I'm a rule follower, but I also, I read the room and I didn't think it was the right decision. Moving from Washington, D.C. to a town of 12,000 people has been a culture shock for all of us, my whole family. I will say, though, that, again, just little gifts that we got along the way. I actually had 2 offers for 2 small liberal arts colleges as an epidemiologist the same year, both in small towns. And when my husband went to his company and said, Becky's gotten a job, all this, their response back to him was, okay, well, you still have your job here. You can't make her decision and your decision as a family based on your employment. They said, we'll figure out how you telework. So we had gifts along the way that allowed us to make the best decisions where we were just kind of blessed with so much kindness and so much flexibility that it really made the decision easy. And it made it so that we weren't worried about things like finances when we moved here. But culturally, it has been a crazy culture shock. Yeah. And my husband is not white, and we live in a very white community. So, he has had to adjust to that there are, 3 other Chinese people within a 50-mile radius. So anyways, it's been hard. I mean, I laugh about that, but it actually has been hard, and as we get into the current moment, how that's affected our kids has also been hard. So
yeah. Okay. So before we get to the current moment, which I'm so excited about, let's just talk about your tenure process, because you got tenure. Yeah. Yay.
I did get tenure. Yes.
What was that like? Was it freaky? Was it hard? How was the going up for tenure and then getting it?
So our college has a pretty strict pre-tenure process, at year 4, that provides both really productive feedback, but also, is I don't know. I want to say weeding out probably isn't fair, but it's strict. So getting through the 4-year mark felt monumental to me. And then you had this 3-year jump after that. I felt pretty confident going up for tenure. I had published a 2nd edition of my textbook and had really great peer reviews from that. I'm trying to think what else were positive things for me. I have a really strong relationship with our local medical center, and I do a lot of collaborative research there, which has been very, very productive in terms of number of publications. That felt good. And then it didn't hurt. I had 2 teaching awards in my pocket before pre-tenure. And so that kind of made, even when student evaluations weren't super great, it provided some context. So I also did something really smart. I'll be very honest. I knew that classes where I had done community engaged work, right? So I had students helping me on this huge community research project across multiple semesters and multiple classes, all that. I knew after a year that those teaching evaluations were lower. Students, it's chaotic, right? You're out in the community. Sometimes you come back and your assignment is a reflection, right? That's hard. It's really hard for an 18, 19, 20-year-old to do that. But I knew that the long-term benefit, right, because I can sit and look backwards, was super important. So I actually did a huge assessment, and I published it, of my student learning. About not looking at what was their experience in the classroom, but did they feel like they engaged with the material? Did they learn civility? Did they collaborate better with one another and all that? And one, the response rate was amazing. Students love providing feedback, but they provided me with some really strong evidence that like our normal, like sit down, take a multiple choice test to evaluate teaching experience, it doesn't capture the learning, and the learning was what was important to me. So I did go above and beyond, but I'm really glad I invested that time because that was really meaningful, not just to me, but it really helped kind of contextualize all of the teaching evaluations that we have to include in our tenure evaluation.
Super smart. I love it. So you got the tenure. Were there trumpets blaring when it happened? What was it like?
It was kind of uneventful.
Right? What was it like to actually get tenured?
It was really uneventful. Right. I had a couple of very, very nice moments. Like, I don't know how people's tenure process go. We have like a little subcommittee that kind of from somebody from the faculty review committee that kind of guides you through the process and like coordinates all the interviews and all the things. And he actually reached out and was just super supportive and very, very kind and helpful and everything. But no, it was really uneventful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't want to make you feel sad, pre-tenure people, but
no,
like you got to plan your own big celebration or whatever, because it
Absolutely.
is kind of like this moment that it's like, I mean, I got a letter.
Yes.
It's like there wasn't enough celebration. But anyway, okay. So you got your tenure, you're doing your thing. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, you can tell me like actually what you consider like the date that COVID kind of like popped on your radar and you went, ooh. But like one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is that rarely, and we've talked about this before, but like rarely is one as an academic thrust onto like the stage, right? Like where all of a sudden something that you've been trying to convince the world is important, all of a sudden the world is like, you're important, And so tell me a little bit about kind of like when COVID first emerged, like what were you thinking?
Well, so there was a Time magazine report on New Year's Eve or New Year's Eve day that kind of like, I think brought this into like our common, like our culture, right? Into like social discourse. And I was reading it. And as I was reading it, I'm like, I think I had that gut reaction. If this is SARS, it's going to be scary again. But SARS, I mean, like my parents don't remember SARS. And like, I'm an epidemiologist, right? So like, but or this is going to be literally the worst case scenario that they teach you about in your outbreaks class, right? Viral, person-to-person spread, asymptomatic, da, 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 da. And so I kind of like going into New Year's was like, And honestly, I knew we started classes on the 13th of January and in the pit of my stomach, I knew it was going to be big. And I was only teaching epidemiology and biostatistics. And I'm like, everything is going to be relevant right now. Like every example I had, not that it should be canned, but like we are entering new space here. And so I knew the first week of classes.
Wow.
And then on the 24th of January, I get a phone call. I'm in my office. I don't usually answer my office phone because no one's ever there, but it was the college relations folks. And so I picked up the phone and I'm like, hey, what do you need? I was thinking like my picture's out of date or something stupid. And they're like, so the local news needs you at their station at 5:30 tonight. They're going to interview you live. And I'm like, okay, excuse me?
Not would you like to go talk to the news?
No. Right. It is was sort of the thing. And I was like, okay, wait, what? So I called the station manager who I didn't know from anyone at that point in time. And now like we're text buddies, right? Yeah. Like we talk all the time. But I went up and I felt like a celebrity. Like, I'm like, I am at the news station. Like, oh my gosh. And everyone was so nice. And like, I'm like, taking pictures of selfies. Like, I'm never going to be on the news again. Like, this is my one time. Like, I'm going to call my mom on the way home. It was really fun and it was positive and everyone was really, really kind. And I answered some questions, right, about, disease spread and what a virus is. Right. I mean, it was super, it felt simple. And then I went home and then oh my gosh, I'm trying to think. It probably no more than a week later, they called back and they're like, things are changing and they're changing fast. They're like, we need to start like doing things. So that's when I kind of realized like, okay, this was not a one-time thing and this is going to be a bigger thing. And so it evolved. This one day on the news became Ask the Expert panels. So we did like live Q&A, no commercial breaks for like an hour and a half on local TV stations. And yeah, so I mean, it ended with, I mean, I think I'm on week 8 right now where I have my own bit on the 11 o'clock news locally. So, and I'm averaging, I think I'm at 10 media events a week at this point in time, which is insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm an academic.
I know. Well, now you're famous.
Not anymore.
So what is a media event? Like, what do you mean? Like an interview, like where they're filming you, or like you get called to like do expert commentary in things? How does that look?
So I have a bit on the 11 o'clock news. It's called Ask the Doctor. So every day, one of the anchors sends me a question that people are asking through the social media sites or calling and asking. And thankfully, I'm at the point now where I can record at home. Because for me, driving to the station is about 45 minutes. And I can't do that every day. Yeah. Especially not for like a 2-minute clip. It's just more than I can handle. So here in Pennsylvania, we are pretty much been under stay-at-home orders up until like 2 weeks ago. So really it has been Zoom interviews. So I've done live Zoom, I've done recorded Zoom, I've done print, I've done TV. We've done a couple of like Facebook and Instagram live things because viewers like the interactive piece of it, which is fun. So most of it's been able to do at home, but it's branched out. So like I have my first love, right? My first TV station, but now I have the other, so they're NBC. So I have the other stations that I now am consulting with and the Pennsylvania Cable Network, which is statewide. And I've done a couple of podcasts and other things. It's just been crazy.
That is crazy. So I want to ask like what I'm thinking that people listening are going to ask. So you seem like a busy person. How'd you also do this stuff? And by the way, were you also like putting all your classes online and all the craziness that everybody else was doing at the same time?
Yes, I'm shaking my head like vigorously. So the craziest part about this semester is I was teaching an overload. So we usually do a 3-3 and I was teaching 4 this semester. Right? So it was a perfect storm. So I think the pivot for me though was a pivot within confidence. So I made up my mind that when we went to online teaching, I'm going to back up. So when I agreed to do the overload, my agreement was that I would teach Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I had to come to campus Tuesdays for meetings, but Thursday was my day. And I owned Thursday. I blocked it out from 6 a.m. to 4:30 in the afternoon, and no one got my time on Thursdays.
Beautiful.
No one, literally no one.
That's fantastic.
I was very, very strict about my Thursdays. I didn't let anyone in. And so I got a lot of stuff done during Thursdays. I did a lot of block timing. I did all my office hours in between classes, right up to classes, right after classes. I was really no nonsense. On Tuesdays, I had to come to campus, but I had zero. Actually, I did all of my office hours on Tuesdays. That's how I organized it. So I was very, very strategic for the semester. But then when we pivoted, the 4 classes I was teaching 2 classes of epidemiology and 2 biostatistics. I made up my mind that doing synchronous learning, which would require me to be online 4 hours a day doing the same thing, was not sustainable for me. And I didn't think it was in the best interest of my students either. So I came up with weekly units. And so I worked through weekly units. I did stacked office hours. I allowed myself, most TV interviews were taking place after 3:30 in the afternoon. So I was kind of planning my afternoons, knowing that you get a call at 2 and need to be at the TV station or being interviewed. So I was very careful with my time. Yes. And I also made some very strategic decisions to stop projects. Things that I've been working on that would be lovely to continue, but I kind of made a list. My list has 5 things that are really important to me as a researcher scholar. And I said, these are the 5 that I'm going to focus on. Everything else goes out the door. Yeah. And I just stopped it. So it was hard, right? There were a lot of things I was attached to, publications that probably could come out and be fine. But I just made up my mind that 5 is all I can handle, and I'm going to start with 5. That list is at 2 now, though. Like, just to be full disclosure, like at spring break, I was like 5, and now I'm like, ooh, I actually need to get these 2 done, and then I'm entering a period of rest. So,
yay. So I just want to highlight a few things about what you just said. Boundaries. Like very, very strict about like, this is when I'm doing this and I'm not doing it at the other times. Like what you explained was like a great example of like how to set up a week that where you can fit in your media appearances, because truthfully, like for you always wanted to influence community health. Like what better way than to all of a sudden have a super public, accessible platform for you to talk to people about public health, right? Yeah. Okay. So you are doing your media appearances, your courses have gone online. Tell me a little bit about like teaching epidemiology during an epidemic. Like, did you like you said, like making everything relevant, did it become like a course about COVID, and did the students like think that was awesome, or did they think like, oh my gosh, I can't hear about this anymore?
So I pivoted in 2 ways. My epidemiology class, I completely restructured so that it was around COVID. I could not imagine students who had enrolled in an epidemiology class in the middle of a pandemic when they had been sent home from school did not want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I scrapped everything I had planned. I looked at the learning objectives for the course and I said, how can we learn this stuff by digging in the moment? And so we did.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. I also got to like things that I wouldn't do in a normal semester, introduce them to writers who I care passionately about and like I enjoy their stuff. I pivoted, I included that, I introduced them to that, and I was okay.
Yeah.
My biostats class, I tried to kind of keep the flow going, but I couldn't ignore the fact that like as the semester was ending, all of these randomized control trials were going on, and the statistics of control trials are super important, and like, but they're also super, like, I don't want to minimize this, right? Like they're complicated, but they rely on underlying foundational principles. And I wanted to empower students, you know, especially the seniors in the class who, you know, are looking at unemployment and no jobs and all that, to say, look, you took this class and it might not feel relevant, but here's how it is. And so thankfully I have a good friend at the medical center who was wrapping up a clinical trial. And I'm like, can I use this as my final? It was unrelated to COVID, but what I was able to say, I did fireside chats. That was my connection with students on Sunday evenings. I said to them, look, you have all of the skills here to enter into a COVID world and do biostatistics.
Wow.
So I pivoted really, I'm working on an empowerment thing, like, cause it's scary right now and like individually scary, corporately scary. So I was working on empowerment in the biostats class.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I can imagine like that those kids are going to remember those classes like that. Yeah. I mean, everybody's going to remember the semester, but, but yeah. Okay. So we know you're strategic. We know that you're thinking about the future. So tell us about like how what's happening now with COVID has affected, like you already said that you eliminated a bunch of projects and really got focused, but how does this affect kind of like your actual career trajectory, like what you see for yourself next? And like for lack of a, because I don't want to say, like I was about to say, how are you using this? But I don't like want to make it sound like that sounds weird. Like how are you pivoting, I guess, in your career in response to being an epidemiologist in the middle of a pandemic?
Oh my gosh. So the pivot has not been like one day I woke up and I stepped left and like I was walking straight and stepped left. I've been kind of veering. So opportunities have arisen and I have yes people, right? I have lots of yes people now. I've actually increased the number of yes people I need because I'm making bigger decisions, right? This isn't like, do I participate in a faculty like development thing? This is like, do I take on consulting work in the middle of this, right? I mean, that has been huge for me to make those decisions. But what I've done is I've stepped back and I said, who am I at my core, right? I'm an epidemiologist who's committed to improving public health and I love teaching, period.
Yeah.
right? And so what I've realized is that consulting work, so I've been working with law firms and with school districts and everything, thinking through is really just taking my lens as an epidemiologist and applying it to this current outbreak.
Yeah.
So I have said yes. I think that those little doors opening has prepared me for the reality. And I don't even think you know this at this point, but I off the cuff one day on, a very high level conversation at our college said, we need a health agency on campus, not a health center.
Okay.
We need a health agency. And everyone kind of looked at me and I'm like, we have no local public health board or office. We're in a rural Pennsylvania town. Yes. We have a great community hospital, but they provide clinical care. Right. And I said, what is needed in this outbreak is education, testing, and analytics. And those things, data, right? Those things, chicken and egg, like that is the biggest mess ever. Like Venn diagram, it's just they're black on top of each other, right? Like I said it off the cuff. I'm like, eh. And honestly, I got a call from our president a few days, weeks, I don't remember the timeline because days are now months. Right, I just don't know, right? Like whatever. And she said, I have a local doctor. I want you to run this thing. And I'm like, excuse me? So we have established, it was announced to the faculty on Tuesday, actually press releases today. So by the time you air this, it will be out. Uh-huh. We have established what we're calling the Allegheny College Health Agency. So it's co-chaired by me or co-directed by me, which is, I'm still adjusting to the word director. That's very scary. Exactly. Sit up straight and own it. So co-directed by me and a local physician who's an ER physician who's been treating COVID patients, who has, a real, kind of feet on the ground type of thing. And we are from the ground up building a health agency to run on our campus. So to do education, testing, and analytics. So in terms of pivoting, I probably will not teach for the next 2 years. I'm in a position where I'm assuming that we'll still have an outbreak, that this will still be an issue in the 21-22 academic year. Yeah. So I have pivoted and I've sort of embraced the fact that I'm no longer a teacher, right? Like I'm not in the classroom, but that my expertise is needed right now to run a health agency, to provide expert counsel, to develop operational plans, to think through not just guiding principles you need to wear a mask, but what are our guiding principles? I've, really thought through how do we educate and communicate and where is risk. So I have completely pivoted. And if I didn't have textbook revisions due July 1st, I would not be an academic right now.
Yeah.
I've just totally stepped out of it.
That is amazing because you'll hear in the other interview episodes, something that has come up is this idea of, and we talk about this in Elevate, right? The container through which you do your work may shift.
Absolutely.
And that you still think about the ways in which you are being a teacher when you are on the local news and through this new agency. And even the first thing that came to my head when you said agency was oh my gosh, this is a model that other colleges can follow. That is
absolutely.
Oh, what did they do? They did this and it looks like this. And here's the data they collect. It's so beautiful.
It is, and it's created new partnerships. So obviously we've had to go out looking for testing materials, right? We have the people who can test, right? We have a great local hospital, but they don't have the capacity to test 2,500 people at move-in, which is literally what we need. We need to know that no one's bringing it onto campus and into town, it being COVID. So in doing all this, I've found a company that has the is putting together what they had called the university plan. And I'm like, this is great. It is, it's super bravo to but we're actually meeting tomorrow because when I said my plan looks like this, that's around 3 zones of thinking about risk and risk management and everything, they were like, oh my gosh, we have the testing, here's the risk management plan, we need to partner. And so I'm partnering with startup testing companies, which just feels weird. But at the same time, it's been so organic and so lovely to think through that together.
And also isn't that what it's supposed to be? Isn't that why do we have people with PhDs in epidemiology if not to inform exactly these things, right?
Yes. No, and I think too, like, I don't know. I mean, I think it comes from the like performance piece of academia, like where we
Mm-hmm.
have one instructor like pouring all of their, and I'm gonna use
Right.
he here, right? He pouring all of his stuff into our minds. I think we've moved a little bit beyond that. Like, okay, well now like we want to do high impact learning and da 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 da. And but like there's opportunity, both financial and work wise, that are outside of the traditional bounds of academia. And I think what I found is that the collaborations are fun, and like working with a lawyer has brought me so much joy, right? Because he's seeing things through the lens of the law, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I need to like think through work, like if we're thinking about like a place where people like buy goods, like we're thinking through like how do we protect a grocery store, right? He's thinking about all of these things, and I'm like, okay, but we have two populations. We have the store, like the shoppers, but we need to think about employees. And like
Yeah.
it's been lovely, but I think that the flip side of it is I've been also thinking like, what is my performance evaluation going to look like this year? Like it's just going to be so different.
Yes.
And what's going to be captured is not going to be a lot of publications, but a
Right.
lot of relationships, a lot of white papers, a lot of collaborations. And I've been thinking like, would I have done this when I was pre-tenure? I keep asking myself that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think I would have in hindsight, like looking at this, because I think what I'm realizing right now is that it's a marathon, right? And so like sometimes you might have a year that isn't productive in terms of like numbers of things. But if you sprinted to get all of the crap work done and you missed out on these big picture, life changing, potentially life sustaining, life altering relationships, that's no good, right? Like, and
Yes.
so I think that, you know, I'm looking at, even if I were pre tenure and I was worried about like publication pipeline and all that, I think that I still would be thinking, I would still be taking these opportunities outside the box, because I think that they are creating new spaces and they're challenging me in ways that I wouldn't be challenged if I was sitting in my office doing my own work by myself.
Yeah, 100%. But also, I'll add to that, if you were pre-tenure and now, you are good at, because I know you like a little bit, like you're good at explaining to your administration that what you're doing is important. And obviously they see it because the president called you up, like they were not like Becky and her things, like they were like, no, like they can see it. So what I wanted to kind of highlight there was that like you're good at communicating it, and you're also at a place that values you. So
Absolutely.
like that is something that I think both of those things are things that people should be striving for. Like in my ideal like world for everybody is that everybody's at a university where their admin sees them as such an asset. So fight for that. Like I would tell people like fight for that and make yourself heard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think making yourself heard. And I think too, one of the things that, you know, if again, thinking like if I were doing this pre-tenure, I would be thinking, okay, this is like, I know you talk a lot about pipeline, like what the pipeline. So this is, you're not like kind of in the pipeline. I feel like you're in like the pond before the pipeline, if that's an analogy, right? Like if you're in the pond before the pipeline, there are clear trajectories that you could talk through, that you could illustrate, that you could demonstrate are reasons to give you tenure. And I think that for me, like if I were thinking this through as a pre-tenure person, I would be like, I'm going to be collecting data, surveillance, antibody, antigen, right? Like my pipeline is enormous. I mean, I probably can't even imagine how amazing it's going to be when I have a hot second to breathe and think this through. Kind of a little bit of forward thinking. You can take your pond and map out a pipeline and have something to show at a review period, which I think is, you know, important to do.
Yeah, 100%. And just like, and articulating those things for yourself and also for the higher ups where you are, because you have to make you have to make a case.
Absolutely.
So that
Yes.
it's very exciting. And I also just want to say like real quick, and I'm sure you have to go because we're at the end of our time, but also like the inner core of you and your mission to me is a very clear thread that continues throughout everything you've talked about. And so like you just keep like now you get to kind of create almost like a new institution, right? This agency where you're going to be able to do the work, the core inside work that you were doing teaching the epidemiology class. Like it's still about the same thing. And that is really fantastic.
Yeah, it's so much fun. Like, oh my gosh, I'm like a little kid. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like creating all day long, but using the creative spirit that we have as whether you're an instructor or researcher or whatever, but to create something new with a very clear purpose, but also knowing that you're using your skills to do it is meaningful work. And part of me, everyone's like, oh my gosh, are you going to be okay not teaching? Are you going to be okay not teaching? And like, I don't know, but like, I think that I'm willing to experiment for a few years to figure out maybe I was actually designed for something else related to this core mission. And that this journey of teaching for 9 years here, right, was just part of the process to take me to someplace new and someplace better and someplace where I'm even more like, I don't know, like in my actual zone of genius. So I'm okay with that because I'm not giving up who I am at the core.
Exactly. Oh, so beautiful. Okay. I'm going to give you the opportunity to tell the people whatever you think we should know, because I'm hoping that this episode will come out in about 2 weeks. So epidemiologists, what should we be thinking about this summer about COVID-19?
So I think with COVID-19, I think the only certainty that exists is that we will have COVID-19. It's here and it is going to disrupt all of our lives. And I don't just mean our academic lives, but it's going to disrupt our family lives, our community lives, and our professional lives for 2 years. And getting our head around that it's hard. Like finding peace in that moment is really hard. So stay there. I think that my pet peeve, is right now this term social distancing. I think it's a really bad term. Mm-hmm. We're trying to create physical space. So I would encourage everyone to change how we're thinking about this. We're creating physical space, but the social interaction, whether it's with a colleague or family members or your next door neighbor, is so important. And especially as academic women who are fighting the good fight and trying to literally change the culture of academia. Mm-hmm. The social, the networking, the community is of the utmost importance. So stop saying social distancing. We cannot socially distance. We need to physically distance ourselves from each other and increase the social, the collaborative, the teamwork, the whatever. So that is my other thing. I have 2 more. 1, find your quarantine. Who is your team that you're going to get through this quarantine, right? This period of physical distancing with you. And for me, you have your family team, like you're right? Mm-hmm. But you also you need to have your professional, you need to have your social, you need to have, who is your team? Because it's going to be hard, and pivoting in the middle of the semester or dealing with illness or whatever is going to be all of our realities. Like we're not going to be able to escape it. So find your team. And then I think as we're going through this, it's hard. And now that I've stepped into like this leadership, directorship position, I think what I'm realizing is that the people who step into my lives and say, I see you doing the hard work, that those comments matter. And I think as academic women, professional women, we need to stop and recognize each other. Right? Whether we agree or disagree or whatever, my getting this job as a director at the college does not impact you, Kathy, your work. Actually, if we could synergize like we're doing here, right? It makes you have a better podcast. And I know that I can fall back on you and your people anytime I need to discuss, think, process.
Yeah.
That's powerful. So I think that as we're going through this and we're thinking about increasing social connections, building our quarantines. And then I think this just needs to be a period of seeing, recognizing, encouraging, and really supporting one another in this moment. Because I think the people who can do that are going to rise out of this pandemic as the leaders, the movers, and the shakers in academia and beyond. And so I can't say enough, like we need to acknowledge and see each other and encourage each other in these spaces.
Oh, it was beautiful, Becky. Thank you so much. I just loved this.
You're welcome. So much fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you for spending your valuable time investing in yourself and your career by listening to this episode. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join the over 13,000 academic women and non-men folks in the I Should Be Writing Facebook group. Just go to facebook.com/groups/I Should Be Writing or search for I Should Be Writing inside your Facebook app. See you inside.